The humid Florida evening of June 23, 2005, should have been just another routine night at the Lakeside Vista apartment complex on International Drive, Orlando's bustling tourist corridor. Instead, it marked the beginning of one of Central Florida's most baffling missing persons. Detective Maria Santos arrived at Building C, Unit 237, to find an apartment that told a story of interrupted normalcy and sudden, inexplicable absence. The Castillo family, Miguel, 29, his wife Carmen, 27, and their 4-year-old daughter Sofia had vanished without a trace. Their disappearance was discovered when Carmen failed to arrive for her evening shift as a housekeeper at the Grand Plaza Hotel on International Drive. Carmen had worked at the hotel for 2 years and had never missed a calling in advance. The apartment complex sat in the shadow of Orlando's theme park empire, a sprawling collection of buildings that housed the service workers who kept the tourism machine running. Lakeside Vista was home to housekeepers, restaurant workers, maintenance staff, and other employees who served the millions of tourists who flocked to Orlando each year. The complex's residents came from across Latin America and the Caribbean, creating a vibrant, multicultural community in the heart of tourist Orlando. Detective Santos, a 10-year veteran of the Orange County Sheriff's Office, had investigated numerous missing persons cases in the transient tourism community, but the Castillo disappearance immediately struck her as different. The family's apartment showed no signs of struggle, but several details suggested something was seriously wrong. The evening meal sat half-finished on the kitchen table, rice and beans growing cold, glasses of orange juice barely touched, and a children's plate with dinosaur shapes that Sofia had been eating from. The television remained tuned to Univision's evening news program, and Carmen's purse sat on the counter next to her car keys. Most tellingly, Sofia's favorite stuffed elephant, which Carmen said the child never went anywhere without, lay abandoned on the living room couch. Miguel's work clothes from his job at Universal Studios maintenance hung in the bedroom closet, and his work boots sat by the front door, where he typically left them after his shifts. Carmen's hotel uniform for that evening's work lay pressed and ready on the bed, suggesting she had been preparing for her 6 p.m. shift when whatever happened occurred. The Castillo family had been model residents of the complex for 18 months, paying their rent on time and maintaining a quiet, respectful presence in the community. Miguel worked double shifts whenever possible at Universal Studios, performing maintenance on rides and attractions during the overnight hours when the park was closed to guests. Carmen's job at the Grand Plaza Hotel provided steady income and health insurance for the family. Their 4-year-old daughter, Sofia, was enrolled in a daycare program at the complex that catered to the children of service workers whose schedules often required evening and weekend childcare. The daycare director, Mrs. Rosa Martinez, reported that Sofia had been picked up by her mother at 4:30 p.m. on June 23rd, following her normal routine. Detective Santos began her investigation by interviewing neighbors in the surrounding apartments, but the transient nature of the community made witness interviews challenging. Many residents worked multiple jobs with irregular schedules, and others were undocumented immigrants who were reluctant to speak with law enforcement officers, even about crimes they might have witnessed. The few neighbors Santos managed to interview provided a consistent picture of the Castillo family as hardworking, quiet people who kept to themselves, but were always polite and helpful when interactions occurred. Mrs. Elena Vargas, who lived in the adjacent unit, reported hearing normal family sounds, television, conversation, and Sofia's laughter, until approximately 5:15 p.m. on June 23rd. After that time, the apartment had been silent. Santos expanded her investigation to include the family's workplaces and extended social network. Miguel's supervisor at Universal Studios confirmed that he had completed his regular maintenance shift on the morning of June 23rd and was scheduled to return for another overnight shift beginning at 11 p.m. same evening. His failure to report for work had been noted, but supervisors had assumed he was dealing with a family emergency. Carmen's manager at the Grand Plaza Hotel painted a similar picture of a reliable employee who had never failed to show up for work without prior notification. The hotel's evening supervisor had tried calling Carmen's apartment when she didn't arrive for her 6 p.m. shift. The hotel had been forced to call in a replacement worker to cover Carmen's floors. The Orange County Sheriff's Office treated the case as a high priority due to the involvement of a young child and the unusual circumstances surrounding the family's disappearance. Missing persons cases in the tourism corridor often involved transient individuals with complex personal histories, but the Castillo family appeared to have stable employment, strong community ties, and no obvious reasons for voluntary disappearance. Detective Santos coordinated with Orlando Police Department and the FBI's field office to ensure comprehensive investigation of a case that could potentially involve kidnapping across state lines. The tourism industry's international connections and the large population of undocumented workers created possibilities for human trafficking or other federal crimes. Initial investigation revealed that the Castillo family had no known enemies or involvement in criminal activities. Miguel's background check showed a clean record with legal immigration status and proper work authorization. Carmen had similarly clean background with no criminal history or immigration problems. Both parents were described by co-workers and neighbors as devoted to their daughter and committed to building a stable life in Orlando. The family's financial records showed modest but steady income from their employment, with regular rent payments and no unusual expenses or transactions that might suggest involvement in illegal activities. Their bank account contained typical deposits and withdrawals for a working-class family, with no large cash transactions or suspicious financial patterns. By the end of June 23rd, Detective Santos had established a basic timeline and gathered preliminary information, but she had no concrete leads about what had happened to the Castillo family. The case had all the characteristics of an abduction, but the lack of physical evidence or witnessing made determining the perpetrator's identity extremely challenging. The International Drive tourism corridor, with its constant flow of visitors and workers, provided countless opportunities for crimes to occur without detection. The area's 24-hour activity and transient population made traditional investigation techniques more difficult than in stable residential neighborhoods. As Detective Santos concluded her first day of investigation, she felt the familiar weight of a case that would likely consume weeks or months of investigative effort. The Castillo family had simply vanished from their apartment in one of Orlando's busiest areas, leaving behind only questions and the growing fear that something terrible had befallen 3 innocent people who had been pursuing the American dream in the shadow of the theme parks. What Detective Santos couldn't have known as she reviewed her notes that first evening was that the Castillo disappearance was connected to a sophisticated criminal organization that had been operating in Orlando's tourism industry for years, using the constant flow of workers and visitors to hide illegal activities worth millions of dollars. The case would eventually expose corruption that reached into the highest levels of local government and law enforcement, but first she would endure years of false leads and frustration as the criminals responsible worked to ensure their secret remained. Within 48 hours of Castillo family's disappearance, Detective Santos began uncovering evidence of criminal activities within Orlando's tourism industry hadn't suspected existed. Her investigation into the family's background revealed connections to a network of legitimate businesses that were serving as fronts for illegal operations involving document fraud, human trafficking, and money laundering. Miguel Castillo's employment at Universal Studios had brought him into contact with contractors and suppliers who provided services to multiple theme parks throughout Central Florida. His maintenance work required access to secure areas, coordination with vendors who delivered equipment and supplies during overnight hours when parks were closed. This access had apparently made him a witness to activities that someone wanted to keep secret. Detective Santos discovered that Miguel had recently filed a complaint to his supervisor about irregular deliveries he had observed during his overnight shifts. According to his supervisor, Miguel had reported seeing unmarked trucks making deliveries to restricted areas of the park, with drivers who didn't follow normal security protocols and cargo that wasn't properly documented through official channels. The complaint had been forwarded to Universal's corporate security department, but no follow-up investigation had been conducted before Miguel's disappearance. When Santos attempted to interview the security personnel who had received the complaint, she found that the relevant files had been destroyed as part of routine record purging, and the investigating officer had been transferred to a different position. Carmen's work at the Grand Plaza Hotel provided another connection to potentially criminal activities. As a housekeeper, she had access to guest rooms and information about visitors who might be involved in illegal activities. Several of her co-workers reported that Carmen had occasionally mentioned observing suspicious behavior among certain hotel guests, including large amounts of cash, unusual meeting patterns, and visitors didn't seem to be typical. The Grand Plaza Hotel catered to business travelers and extended-stay guests rather than typical theme parks, providing opportunities for criminal organizations to use the facility for activities that required privacy, and Carmen's position would have given her insights into guest behaviors and activities that could have been valuable or dangerous if she observed criminal operation. Detective Santos expanded her investigation to include other missing persons cases involving tourism industry workers, and she discovered a disturbing pattern of disappearances that had been occurring throughout Central Florida for several years. At least 6 other individuals with similar backgrounds, hotel workers, theme park employees, and service industry personnel, had vanished under mysterious circumstances since 2003. The previous disappearances had been investigated individually by different law enforcement agencies, preventing recognition of potential connections between the cases. However, Santos's analysis revealed that all of the missing persons had worked in positions that provided access to sensitive areas or information within the tourism industry, and several had made reports or complaints about suspicious activities before their disappearances. FBI Special Agent David Rodriguez joined Santos's investigation when the potential connections to human trafficking and organized crime became apparent. Rodriguez had been monitoring criminal activities in Orlando's tourism industry as part of a broader federal investigation into illegal immigration and document fraud operations that exploited the large population of undocumented workers in Central Florida. Orlando's tourism industry creates perfect conditions for criminal organizations to operate, Agent Rodriguez explained to Santos during their first coordination meeting. The constant flow of workers and visitors, the large economy, and the many businesses that need flexible labor arrangements provide cover for activities that would be more visible in other communities. The federal investigation had identified several businesses throughout Central Florida that were suspected of providing fraudulent documents, illegal employment arrangements, and money laundering services to criminal organizations. Many of these businesses operated openly as legitimate service providers while conducting illegal activities that were carefully hidden from law enforcement oversight. Agent Rodriguez's information revealed that the criminal network exploiting Orlando's tourism industry was much larger and more sophisticated than Santos had initially. The organization included corrupt business owners, compromised government officials, and law enforcement personnel who provided protection and information in exchange for financial compensation. The investigation took on new urgency when Santos and Rodriguez discovered evidence the criminal organization was actively monitoring their activities and had been alerted to their interest in the Castillo case. Surveillance detected during routine investigation work suggested that someone with access to law enforcement information was providing intelligence to criminal associates. Santos's phone record showed calls from unknown numbers that hung up immediately when she answered, and her personal vehicle had been photographed by unidentified individuals while she was conducting interviews. The harassment tactics were sophisticated and suggest involvement by criminals with law enforcement experience or access to professional surveillance resources. The investigation revealed that Miguel Castillo's complaint about irregular deliveries at Universal Studios had been more significant. The deliveries he observed were part of a smuggling operation that used theme park facilities to move illegal goods and undocumented workers throughout Florida and other southeastern states. Carmen's observations at the Grand Plaza Hotel had similarly identified activities related to money laundering operations that processed cash from various illegal enterprises through legitimate tourism business. Her position had provided her with information about financial transactions and guest activities that could have exposed the criminal organization's method. Detective Santos realized that the Castillo family's disappearance was not a random crime, but a calculated elimination of witnesses who posed threats to criminal operations worth millions of dollars. The sophistication of the criminal network and their apparent infiltration of law enforcement agencies made the investigation extremely dangerous for everyone involved. The pattern of previous disappearances suggested that the criminal organization had been systematically eliminating potential witnesses for years while using their influence within law enforcement and government to prevent effective investigation. The Castillo case represented an opportunity to expose the entire network, but it also put Santos and Rodriguez at serious personal risk. Agent Rodriguez implemented enhanced security measures for the investigation, including encrypted communication systems and compartmentalized information sharing, designed to prevent criminal infiltration of law enforcement activity. However, these measures also complicated coordination between different agencies and slowed the investigation's progress. The federal investigation revealed that Orlando's rapid growth and development had created opportunities for criminal organizations to establish operations that exploited both legal and illegal aspects of the tourism economy. The constant construction of new hotels, restaurants, and entertainment facilities provided cover for money laundering and illegal labor operations. By late July 2005, Santos and Rodriguez had identified several businesses and individuals who were likely involved in the criminal network responsible for the Castillo disappearance. However, they lacked the evidence necessary for arrests and faced the challenge of investigating suspects who had demonstrated sophisticated counter-surveillance capabilities. The case had evolved from a missing persons investigation into a comprehensive examination of organized crime activities that had been operating in Central Florida for years. The Castillo family's fate remained unknown, but their disappearance had exposed criminal activities that affected hundreds of workers and millions of dollars in illegal transactions. Detective Santos found herself investigating not just a single crime, but an entire criminal ecosystem that had grown around Orlando's tourism industry. The challenge would be gathering enough evidence to prosecute the responsible parties while protecting other potential victims from a criminal organization that had already demonstrated its willingness to eliminate threats through violence and intimidation. The summer of 2005 brought a series of promising leads that ultimately proved to be carefully orchestrated misdirection designed to frustrate the investigation and waste law enforcement resources. Detective Santos and Agent Rodriguez found themselves chasing false clues that seemed credible initially but invariably led to dead ends that provided no useful information about the Castillo family's fate. The first major false lead emerged in early August when an anonymous caller contacted the Orange County Sheriff's Office tip line claiming to have information about the Castillo disappearance. The caller, who spoke in accented English, reported seeing a family matching the Castillo's description at a truck stop near Gainesville on the evening of June 23rd, accompanied by men who appeared to be controlling their movements. Santos immediately coordinated with Alachua County Sheriff's deputies to investigate the reported sighting. The truck stop's security cameras had been malfunctioning during the relevant time period, but interviews with employees and other witnesses initially seemed to corroborate the anonymous tip. Several people reported seeing a Hispanic family with a young child who appeared stressed. However, intensive investigation revealed that the family observed at the truck stop was eventually identified as tourists from Puerto Rico who were traveling to visit relatives in Jacksonville. The timing and descriptions had been close enough to seem credible, but detailed follow-up proved that the sighting was unrelated to the Castillo case. Agent Rodriguez began to suspect that the false lead had been deliberately planted to misdirect the investigation toward northern Florida, while the real perpetrators operated in different areas. The sophistication of the deception suggested involvement by individuals with detailed knowledge of how law enforcement agencies respond to missing persons. The second false lead involved a reported connection to human trafficking along Interstate 4, the major highway connecting Tampa and Orlando. A confidential informant contacted Agent Rodriguez claiming that the Castillo family had been sold to traffickers who specialized in forced labor operations in agricultural areas throughout Central Florida. The informant provided specific details about trafficking routes and methods that seemed consistent with known criminal operations, making the information appear credible enough to warrant extensive investigation. Federal agents and local law enforcement officers spent weeks investigating agricultural operations and conducting surveillance of suspected locations. The investigation consumed significant resources and diverted attention from other aspects of the case, but it ultimately revealed no evidence connecting the Castillo family to human trafficking operations. The informant disappeared after providing the initial information, and subsequent attempts to verify his claims proved impossible. Detective Santos realized that the false leads were following a pattern designed to exploit law enforcement agencies' obligation to investigate credible tips while wasting time and resources that could have been used more effectively. The criminal organization appeared to understand police procedures well enough to craft deceptions that would consume investigative capacity. The third major false lead emerged in September 2005 when construction workers renovating an abandoned warehouse in the Paramore neighborhood near downtown Orlando reported finding personal items that might have belonged to the Castillo family. The items included children's clothing, jewelry that resembled pieces Carmen was known to wear, and documents with Hispanic names. The discovery generated significant media attention and renewed hope the case would finally be resolved. Crime scene technicians processed the warehouse thoroughly, collecting evidence and analyzing the personal items for DNA and other forensic markers that might confirm connections to the missing family. However, forensic analysis proved that none of the items had belonged to the Castillo family. The clothing was the wrong sizes, the jewelry lacked distinctive character that would have identified it as Carmen's, and the documents belonged to completely different individuals who had no connection. Investigation revealed that the warehouse had been used by homeless individuals and transients for several years, and the personal items had accumulated over time from various sources. The timing of the discovery, immediately after renovation work began, suggested that someone had deliberately planted items designed to appear connected to the Castillo case. Agent Rodriguez's analysis of the false lead revealed sophisticated knowledge of law enforcement investigative techniques and access to information in the case that should have been restricted to investigators and their immediate contact. The deceptions were too well crafted to be random attempts at misdirection. The pattern of false leads had several effects that benefited the criminal organization responsible for the Castillo disappearance. The investigations consumed enormous amounts of time and resources, diverted attention from productive lines of inquiry, and created enough confusion to undermine media and public confidence in the investigation's effectiveness. Most importantly, the false leads provided the criminal organization with intelligence about law enforcement investigative methods and capabilities. Each deception that investigators pursued revealed information about police procedures, evidence collection techniques, and interagency cooperation that could be valuable for protecting criminal operations. Detective Santos began documenting the sources and characteristics of false leads, looking for patterns that might reveal how the criminal organization was gathering intelligence about the investigation. Her analysis suggested that someone with access to law enforcement information was providing regular updates to criminal associates. The investigation took on an additional layer of complexity as Santos and Rodriguez realized they were not just investigating a disappearance, but were engaged in a sophisticated game of counterintelligence with criminals who understood their method and were actively working to defeat. By October 2005, 4 months after the Castillo family's disappearance, Santos and Rodriguez had pursued dozens of leads without finding any genuine evidence about the family's fate. The false leads had been so numerous and convincing that distinguishing between legitimate tips and deliberate misdirection had become a significant challenge. The investigation's lack of visible progress created pressure from supervisors and family members who wanted answers and results. Santos faced criticism for the investigation's resource consumption and apparent lack of focus, though she couldn't publicly explain that many of the problems were caused by sophisticated criminal countermeasures. Agent Rodriguez implemented enhanced security protocols for the investigation, including stricter controls on information sharing procedures designed to detect potential security breaches. However, these measures also made coordination more difficult and potentially slowed progress on legitimate aspects of the case. The false leads had achieved their intended purpose of frustrating and misdirecting the investigation while providing criminal associates with valuable intelligence about law enforcement activity. The Castillo family remained missing, and the criminal organization responsible for their disappearance had successfully protected themselves from detection for months. However, the pattern of false leads had also revealed information about the criminal organization's capabilities and methods that would eventually prove valuable for understanding their structure and operation. The sophistication of their deceptions indicated resources and expertise that suggested involvement by individuals with law enforcement or intelligence backgrounds. Detective Santos recognized that she was dealing with an adversary unlike any she had encountered in previous investigations. The criminal organization's ability to manipulate the investigation while maintaining their operational security demonstrated a level of sophistication that would require new approaches and enhanced cooperation with federal resources. The breakthrough in understanding the scope of corruption protecting the criminal organization came in November 2005, when Agent Rodriguez's financial investigation revealed suspicious banking patterns involving several Orlando area law enforcement officers. The analysis showed regular cash deposits that were inconsistent with official salaries and occurred at times that coincided with developments in the Castillo investigation. The financial analysis focused on Orange County Sheriff's Deputy, Orlando Police Office, and federal agents who had access to information about the missing person. Rodriguez used sophisticated banking software to identify patterns of cash deposits, wire transfers, and other financial activities that might indicate corrupt relationships with criminal organizations. The most suspicious patterns involved Detective Lieutenant Robert Morrison of the Orange County Sheriff's Office, who supervised several units that had access to sensitive information about ongoing investigations. Morrison's bank accounts showed regular cash deposits totaling over $75,000 during the 6 months preceding and following the Castillo disappearance. Morrison's financial activities were carefully structured to avoid federal reporting requirements, with deposits typically falling just below the $10,000 threshold that would trigger automatic scrutiny. The timing of the deposits correlated with major developments in the Castillo investigation, suggesting he was being paid for providing information to outside parties. Agent Rodriguez coordinated with the FBI's Public Corruption Unit to investigate Morrison and other potentially compromised personnel without alerting them to the investigation. The corruption probe required sophisticated surveillance tech, careful analysis of financial records, communications, travel patterns that might indicate criminal. The investigation revealed that Morrison had been meeting regularly with Vincent Torino, a businessman who operated several legitimate companies in the tourism industry while serving as a front for criminal organizations. Torino owned restaurants, souvenir shops, and transportation service that catered to theme park visitors and provided perfect cover for money laundering operations. Surveillance of Morrison's activities revealed that he was providing detailed information about the Castillo investigation to Torino during regular meetings at restaurants and hotels throughout the Orlando area. The meetings were conducted with sophisticated counter-surveillance awareness, indicating that both participants understood they were engaged in criminal activity. Wiretaps authorized for the corruption investigation captured conversations between Morrison and Torino that provided evidence of systematic information sharing about law enforcement activity. Morrison was recorded providing specific details about investigative techniques, potential witnesses, and planned operations that could be valuable for protecting criminal enterprises. The federal team is focusing on the hotel connect. They're looking at employee records and guest lists from the Grand Plaza. You might want to make sure your people know they're getting close to something. Yes, the wiretaps revealed that the corruption network was much larger than initially suspected, involving personnel from multiple law enforcement agents and extending to prosecutors and judges who provided protection for criminal operations in exchange for financial compensation. The systematic nature of the corruption explained how the criminal organization had been able to operate with impunity for years. Detective Santos was shocked to learn that her own supervisor had been compromised and was actively sabotaging the investigation she had been conducting. Morrison's access to case files and investigative plans had allowed the criminal organization to stay ahead of law enforcement efforts while crafting sophisticated false leads designed to waste resources and misdirect attention. "I've been sharing case information with Morrison for months," Santos told Rodriguez when briefed about the corruption investigation. "Every lead we've pursued, every strategy we've developed, every piece of evidence we've gathered, he's known about all of it and apparently been passing it along to the people responsible for the Castillo's disappearance." The corruption investigation revealed that Morrison had been receiving payments from Torino's organization for over 3 years, providing protection and information for criminal activities that extended far beyond the Castillo case. His corruption had enabled the criminal network to avoid prosecution for numerous illegal activities involving human trafficking, money laundering, and document fraud. Agent Rodriguez discovered that the false leads that had plagued the investigation were being generated based on inside information about law enforcement procedures and capabilities provided by Morrison and other corrupted personnel. The criminal organization's sophisticated understanding of investigative techniques came from having access to actual law enforcement expertise. The corruption probe also revealed that several federal agents and prosecutors had been compromised, creating challenges for conducting investigations and prosecutions without alerting criminal associates to law enforcement activity. The systematic nature of the corruption required enhanced security measures and compartmentalized operations to protect ongoing investigation. Most disturbing was the revelation that Morrison had been providing advance warning about planned arrests and searches, allowing criminal associates to destroy evidence and escape prosecution. The corruption had enabled the criminal organization to eliminate potential witnesses and evidence, while making their activities appear to be the result of sophisticated criminal expertise rather than inside information. The investigation into Morrison's activities revealed that he had been instrumental in covering up previous disappearances involving tourism industry workers who had posed threats to the criminal organization. His position had allowed him to misdirect investigation and ensure that cases remained unsolved while maintaining the appearance of thorough law enforcement efforts. Agent Rodriguez faced the challenge of continuing the Castillo investigation while protecting it from further corruption and building cases against the compromised law enforcement personnel. The corruption probe had to be conducted carefully to avoid alerting other criminal associates who might destroy evidence or eliminate witnesses. The evidence against Morrison and his associates was compelling, but prosecutors needed additional evidence to ensure successful prosecution of corruption charges that would withstand sophisticated legal challenges. The investigation required patience and methodical evidence gathering, while the Castillo family remained missing and their fate unknown. By December 2005, the corruption investigation had identified a network of compromised personnel that included law enforcement officers, prosecutors, and judges who had been protecting criminal operations throughout Central Florida. The systematic nature of the corruption explained how sophisticated criminal organizations had been able to operate in Orlando's tourism industry with minimal law enforcement interference. However, the corruption investigation had also provided Agent Rodriguez and Detective Santos with crucial intelligence about the criminal organization's structure and operation. The wiretaps and financial evidence revealed connections between various criminal enterprises and identified key figures who were likely responsible for the Castillo disappearance. The challenge remained converting this into prosecutable evidence while protecting from further corruption and ensuring that the criminal organization didn't eliminate additional witness or evidence. The next phase of the investigation would require enhanced security measures and careful coordination to prevent the sophisticated criminal network from escaping justice once again. In January 2006, 7 months after the Castillo family's disappearance, Agent Rodriguez launched an elaborate undercover operation designed to penetrate Vincent Torino's criminal organization and gather direct evidence of their involvement in the missing person. The operation required extensive planning and coordination with uncorrupted federal personnel to ensure that criminal associates wouldn't receive advance warning of law enforcement activities. Special Agent Lisa Chen was selected for the undercover assignment based on her fluency in Spanish and her previous experience investigating human trafficking operations. Chen adopted the identity of Maria Vasquez, a businesswoman with transportation and logistics expertise who was seeking opportunities to expand her operations into Central Florida's growing tourism market. The cover identity was carefully constructed to appeal to Torino's organization while providing legitimate reasons for seeking involvement activity. Chen's background included experience in legitimate businesses that could genuinely assist criminal operations, making her a potentially valuable asset rather than an obvious law enforcement. Chen's initial approach to Torino's organization came through contacts in Miami's transportation industry, where federal agents had identified businesses that provided services to criminal enterprises throughout Florida. The introduction strategy allowed Chen to establish credibility gradually while demonstrating skills that were useful for criminal. Vincent Torino's initial meetings with Chen were conducted with sophisticated security measures that reflected his awareness of law enforcement attention and his understanding of investigative techniques. Torino used counter-surveillance procedures, varied meeting locations, and carefully controlled information sharing to minimize risks of law enforcement infiltration. However, Chen's legitimate business background and carefully constructed personal history enabled her to pass Torino's security screening. Her expertise in transportation logistics was genuinely valuable for criminal operations that required moving people, money, and goods throughout Florida and other southeastern states. Over several months, Chen gradually gained access to Torino's criminal network by providing valuable services that enhanced their operational capabilities. Her transportation knowledge helped optimize smuggling routes, and her connections in the business community provided opportunities for expanding money laundering operations. Chen's acceptance into the criminal organization provided unprecedented access to information about their structure and operations. She attended planning meetings, participated in coordination of illegal activities, and gained insights into the network's methods that would have been impossible to obtain through traditional investigation techniques. The undercover operation revealed that Torino's organization was much larger and more sophisticated than federal investigators had initially suspected. The criminal network included dozens of businesses throughout Central Florida that provided services ranging from document fraud and money laundering to human trafficking and contract violence. Most significantly, Chen discovered that the organization maintained detailed records of their criminal activities, apparently as insurance against betrayal by associates and protection against law enforcement prosecution. The records included information about previous operations that might be connected to missing persons cases throughout the region. Chen's position within the organization gradually provided access to information about what the criminals referred to as containment operations, activities designed to eliminate threats to the network's continued operation. These operations included intimidation, relocation, and in some cases, permanent elimination of individuals who posed risk to criminal activities. The undercover operation reached a crucial turning point when Chen gained access to a storage facility where Torino's organization maintained files and equipment related to their various criminal enterprises. The facility contained documents, surveillance equipment, and other materials that provided comprehensive evidence of illegal activities spanning several years. Among the stored materials, Chen discovered files related to what was labeled as Universal Situation that appeared to contain information about the Castillo family disappearance. The files included surveillance photographs of Miguel Castillo at his workplace, detailed information about Carmen's work schedule, and planning documents that suggested extensive preparation for some type of operation. The files revealed that the criminal organization had been monitoring the Castillo family for several weeks before their disappearance, gathering intelligence about their daily routines, work schedules, and personal relationships. The surveillance was comprehensive and professional, suggesting involvement by individuals with law enforcement or military experience. Most disturbing were documents that appeared to be operational plans for what was described as a family containment that included detailed procedures for abduction, transportation, and disposal. The clinical terminology couldn't disguise the implication that the Castillo family had been targeted for elimination rather than simple intimidation or relocation. Chen photographed the Universal Situation files using concealed equipment, providing federal investigators with documentary evidence that could support murder charges against Torino and his associate. However, her access to the sensitive materials also put her in extreme danger if the organization discovered that their security had been compromised. The undercover operation had to be carefully managed to gather additional evidence while preventing Chen's exposure as a law enforcement. The criminal organization's demonstrated willingness to use violence against perceived threats made her assignment extremely hazardous, requiring enhanced security measures and emergency extraction procedures. Agent Rodriguez coordinated the undercover operation secure facility, maintaining communication with Chen through encrypted systems and monitoring her safety through various technical means. The operation required precise timing to maximize evidence gathering while minimizing risks to Chen and other potential witnesses. Chen's recordings captured conversations where Torino and his associates discussed their methods for dealing with threats to the organization, including references to previous operations that had resolved problems permanently. The conversations provided evidence of ongoing criminal conspiracies and demonstrated the network's willingness to use extreme violence. The undercover operation revealed that the criminal organization had been systematically eliminating potential witnesses for years, using their law enforcement connections to ensure that investigations remained unsuccessful. The Castillo family appeared to be just one example of the network's approach to protecting their illegal activities through violence and intimidation. By late 2006, Chen's undercover work had provided comprehensive evidence of the criminal organization's structure and operation, including strong circumstantial evidence of their involvement in the Castillo. However, Agent Rodriguez recognized that they needed more definitive proof to ensure successful prosecution of murder charges. The challenge was converting the intelligence gathered through the undercover operation into prosecutable evidence while protecting Chen and preventing the criminal organization from destroying materials or eliminating witnesses. The next phase of the investigation would require careful planning for key figures, securing evidence that could withstand sophisticated legal challenges. By early 2007, Agent Chen's undercover operation had provided federal investigators with comprehensive evidence of Vincent Torino's criminal network and mounting proof of their involvement in the Castillo family disappearance. However, Agent Rodriguez recognized that they needed additional evidence and direct testimony to build prosecutable murder cases against the organization's leadership. The breakthrough came when Chen gained access to Vincent Torino's private office in his ostensibly legitimate transportation business, where sophisticated surveillance revealed a secure room containing detailed records of criminal operations spanning nearly a decade. The room was protected by advanced security systems, but Chen's gradual acceptance into Torino's inner circle provided opportunities to access areas that traditional investigation could never reach. Chen discovered that Torino maintained meticulous documentation of criminal activities as protection against betrayal by associates and leverage against law enforcement prosecution. The files included detailed records of bribes paid to corrupt officials, operational plans for various criminal enterprises, and what appeared to be after-action reports for violent crimes committed by the organization. The most significant discovery was a file labeled Universal Family Problem that contained comprehensive documentation related to the Castillo disappearance. The file included surveillance reports, operational planning documents, personnel assignments, and detailed accounts of how the containment operation had been conducted and covered up. Chen's access to the file revealed that the Castillo family had been targeted because Miguel's maintenance position at Universal Studios had provided him with information about smuggling operations that used theme park facilities to move illegal goods and undocumented workers throughout Florida. His reports about irregular delivery had threatened to expose criminal activities worth millions of dollars. The documentation showed that Carmen's observations at the Grand Plaza Hotel had similarly identified money laundering operations that processed cash from various illegal enterprises through legitimate tourism businesses. Her position had given her insights into financial transactions that could have exposed the criminal organization's methods. She had reported them to law enforcement. Torino's files provided detailed information about how the Castillo murders had been planned and executed, including the decision to eliminate the entire family rather than just the witnesses who posed direct threats. The operational planning had been extensive, with contingency procedures for various scenarios and comprehensive cleanup protocols. Agent Chen photographed the Universal family problem file using concealed equipment, providing investigators with documentary evidence that could support first-degree murder charges against Torino and his associates. However, accessing the sensitive materials also increased Chen's danger as the organization began implementing enhanced security measures to protect against potential infiltration. The file documentation revealed that the Castillo family had been abducted from their apartment during the early evening hours of June 23, 2005, using techniques designed to avoid detection by neighbors or security systems. The operation had involved 6 members of the criminal organization, including specialists in surveillance, abduction, and evidence disposal. According to Torino's records, the family had been transported to a remote warehouse facility in rural Orange County, where they were interrogated about what Miguel had observed at Universal Studios and what information they might have shared with law enforcement or other parties. The interrogation had continued for several hours before the family was killed. The bodies had disposed of using methods designed to ensure they would never be recovered, including processing through criminal associates who operated funeral homes and cremation service. The disposal operation had been coordinated to leave no physical evidence that could be discovered through law enforcement investigation. Chen's discovery of the operational records provided Agent Rodriguez with the evidence necessary to build comprehensive prosecution cases against Torino and his criminal network. However, extracting Chen from the undercover operation without alerting the organization to the security breach required careful planning and coordination. The investigators developed a strategy for ending Chen's undercover assignment while preparing for coordinated arrests and searches that would prevent the criminal network from destroying evidence or eliminating witnesses. The timing had to be precise to maximize evidence collection while ensuring Chen's safety and preventing criminal associates from escaping. Agent Rodriguez coordinated with federal prosecutors to prepare charging documents and search warrants based on the evidence Chen had gathered during her undercover. The case preparation included extensive documentation of criminal activities and financial transactions support racketeering charges under federal RICO statute. Detective Santos worked with local law enforcement agencies to prepare for simultaneous operations that would effectively dismantle Torino's criminal network while securing evidence related to the Castillo murders and other violent crimes. The coordination required extensive planning to prevent criminal associates from warning each other or destroying incriminating materials. The investigation had also identified Detective Lieutenant Robert Morrison and other corrupt law enforcement personnel who would need to be arrested simultaneously to prevent them from alerting criminal associates or obstructing the enforcement operation. The corruption prosecution coordinated the organized crime case to ensure comprehensive dismantling of the entire network. Chen's undercover operation reached its conclusion in March 2007, when she reported that Torino was planning to conduct comprehensive background investigations of all organization members using outside security specialists. The enhanced security measures would almost certainly expose Chen's true identity and put her life in extreme danger. Agent Rodriguez implemented emergent extraction pursued Chen to Torino's organization without immediately alerting criminal associates to law enforcement. Chen's personal emergency wired her Florida, providing cover for her departure while maintaining operational security. However, the extraction meant that investigators lost their inside source of intelligence about the criminal organization's activities and responses to law enforcement pressure. The timing of arrests and searches would have to be accelerated to prevent Torino and his associates from adapting security measures or eliminating evidence and witness. Federal prosecutors, working with Agent Rodriguez and Detective Santos, finalized a comprehensive enforcement strategy that would arrest key criminal figures while executing searches at dozens of locations throughout Central Florida. The operation represented the culmination of nearly 2 years of investigation and would determine whether justice could finally be achieved for the Castillo family. The evidence gathered through Chen's undercover work had provided definitive answers about the Castillo family's fate while revealing the sophisticated criminal enterprise responsible for their deaths. However, converting this intelligence into successful prosecutions would require flawless execution of one of the most complex law enforcement operations in Central Florida. The coordinated operation to arrest Vincent Torino and dismantle his criminal network began at 5 a.m. on April 12, 2007, with simultaneous raids at 23 locations throughout Central Florida. FBI SWAT team, supported by federal agents and local law enforcement officers, executed search warrants at Torino's businesses, residences, and storage facilities while arresting key figures in his criminal organization. Detective Santos was present when federal agents approached Torino's primary residence in the exclusive Windermere community west of Orlando. The lakefront mansion had been purchased with proceeds from years of criminal activity, and its sophisticated security systems reflected Torino's awareness of potential law enforcement attention. Torino's arrest was conducted without violent resistance, though his calm demeanor suggested he had been preparing for eventual law enforcement. His first words to Agent Rodriguez were, "I suppose my insurance policies weren't sufficient to prevent this day from coming. I assume you're interested in discussing various business arrangements, including the family situation from Universal." The search of Torino's properties yielded extensive evidence that corroborated Agent Chen's undercover findings and provided additional documentation of criminal activity spanning nearly a decade. The secure storage room in his transportation business contained not only the files Chen had discovered, but also additional materials related to other violent crimes and criminal operations. Most significantly, investigators discovered sophisticated video recording equipment that Torino had used to document various criminal activities, apparently as leverage to associates and protection against potential betrayal. Among the recorded materials was footage related to the Castillo murders that provided graphic evidence of the family's fate. The video recordings included planning meetings where Torino and his associates had discussed the necessity of eliminating the Castillo family, surveillance footage of the family's daily activities in the weeks preceding their disappearance, and disturbing documentation of the actual abduction and subsequent events. Detective Santos found viewing the murder recordings to be one of the most difficult experiences of her law enforcement career. After nearly 2 years of searching for answers about the Castillo family's fate, seeing the actual crimes provided closure, but also confronted her with the brutal reality of what had been done to innocent people whose only crime was observing criminal activity. Those recordings showed us exactly what happened to Miguel, Carmen, and little Sofia, Santos later told Agent Rodriguez. Torino preserved them like trophies, which makes his crimes even more horrific. But they also provided the evidence we needed to ensure he could never hurt anyone else again. The simultaneous arrests included Detective Lieutenant Robert Morrison and other corrupt law enforcement personnel who had been providing protection for Torino's criminal network. Morrison's arrest was particularly shocking to his colleagues who had worked with him for years without suspecting his involvement in criminal activity. Morrison's corruption had been even more extensive than initially revealed by the financial investigation. Seized documents showed that he had been receiving payments from Torino's organization for over 4 years, providing intelligence about law enforcement activities and actively sabotaging investigations that threatened criminal operations. The evidence against Morrison included recorded conversations where he discussed specific details about the Castillo investigation with Torino, providing information that had been used to generate false leads and misdirect law enforcement resources. His betrayal had been instrumental in protecting the criminal organization from prosecution. The coordinated operation also targeted businesses throughout Central Florida that had been providing services for Torino's criminal network, including document fraud operations, money laundering services, and facilities used for human trafficking. The comprehensive approach was designed to dismantle the entire criminal infrastructure rather than just arresting individuals. By the end of April 12, 2007, 37 individuals had been arrested in connection with Torino's criminal organization, including business owners, transportation operators, and professional service providers who had facilitated various illegal activities. The scope of the arrests demonstrated how extensively the criminal network had penetrated legitimate businesses throughout the region. The searches yielded enormous amounts of evidence, including financial documenting years of money laundering operation, correspondence revealing the extent of corruption within law enforcement and government agencies, and detailed record of criminal acts that could support prosecutions for dozens. Agent Rodriguez coordinated the evidence process with federal prosecutors, ensuring that materials would meet courtroom standards and support comprehensive prosecution under federal racketeering statute. The evidence organization required teams of analysts and legal professionals working around the clock against all arrested individuals. The arrest operation had effectively eliminated Torino's criminal network's operational capacity, but it had also triggered investigations into related criminal enterprises throughout Florida and other southeastern states. The intelligence gathered from Torino's organization provided evidence of connections to criminal activities extending far beyond Central Florida. However, the most important result of the arrest operation was the recovery of information about the Castillo family's fate and the location where their remains had been disposed of. Torino's detailed records provided specific information that would finally allow the family's relatives to achieve closure after nearly 2 years of uncertainty. The video evidence and documentary materials seized during the arrests provided prosecutors with overwhelming evidence to support murder charges against Torino and his key associates. The comprehensive nature of the evidence made successful prosecution virtually certain, but the legal proceedings would still require months of preparation and trial work. Detective Santos worked with victim advocates and family counselors to prepare the Castillo family's relatives for the difficult process of learning the details of their loved ones' deaths and participating in the prosecution proceedings. The graphic evidence would be traumatic for family members, but it would also provide the closure they had been seeking. The arrest operation had succeeded beyond investigators' expectations, providing not only justice for the Castillo family, but also dismantling one of Central Florida's most sophisticated criminal organizations. However, the evidence had also revealed the true scope of corruption and criminal activity that had been operating in Orlando's tourism industry for years. Faced with overwhelming evidence, including video recordings of the murders and comprehensive documentation of his criminal operations, Vincent Torino agreed to cooperate with federal prosecutors in exchange for a plea agreement that would spare him the death penalty. The negotiation process required approval from the Department of Justice, given the severity of the charges and the high-profile nature of the case. On April 25, 2007, Vincent Torino began providing his detailed confession about the Castillo murders and his criminal organization's activity. The confession sessions were conducted in a secure federal facility with Agent Rodriguez, Detective Santos, and federal prosecutors present to ensure complete documentation of his statement. Torino's confession revealed that his decision to eliminate the Castillo family had been motivated by Miguel's reports about irregular deliveries at Universal Studios and Carmen's observations of suspicious activities at the Grand Plaza Hotel. Both had inadvertently discovered aspects of criminal operations that could have exposed his entire network if investigated by law enforcement. Miguel Castillo was a dedicated employee who took his maintenance responsibilities seriously, Torino explained during his confession. He noticed when deliveries didn't follow normal procedures, and he started documenting irregularities, discussing them with supervisors. We couldn't allow him to continue investigating activities that would lead to our smuggling operation. Torino detailed the extensive surveillance operation that preceded the murders, including weeks of monitoring the family's daily routines, work schedule, and personal relationships. His organization had used sophisticated electronic surveillance and physical observation to develop comprehensive intelligence about potential vulnerabilities and operational opportunities. The planning for what Torino called the Universal Containment Operation had been extensive, with detailed procedures for abduction, transportation, interrogation, and disposal. The operation had been designed to eliminate the Castillo family while creating confusion about their fate and misdirecting any subsequent law enforcement investigation. According to Torino's confession, the abduction had occurred on the evening of June 23, 2005, when Carmen was preparing to leave for her shift at the Grand Plaza Hotel. The timing had been carefully selected to coincide with Sofia's presence in the apartment and Miguel's availability before his overnight work schedule. We entered the apartment using keys obtained through contacts in the building management, Torino. The family was told they were being relocated for their safety due to threats against Miguel from his workplace reports. The deception prevented resistance and allowed us to transport them without attracting attention from neighbors. The confession revealed that the family had been taken to an abandoned warehouse facility in rural Orange County, where Torino and his associates had prepared an interrogation site with soundproofing and equipment necessary for what he described as enhanced questioning. The location had been selected for its isolation and the organization's ability to control access. Torino's account became increasingly disturbing as he described the interrogation of the Castillo family during their final hours. The questioning had focused on determining what information Miguel and Carmen had shared with supervisors, law enforcement officers, or other parties who might continue investigating if the family simply disappeared. We needed to be certain that eliminating the family would completely resolve the security, Torino explained with clinical detachment. The interrogation established that Miguel had only reported his observations to his immediate supervisor, and Carmen had only mentioned suspicious guest activities to co-workers rather than law enforcement. The confession revealed that 4-year-old Sofia had been killed first to prevent her parents from cooperating fully with the interrogation. Torino claimed the decision was necessary to demonstrate the seriousness of the situation and encourage complete honesty from Miguel and Carmen about potential security risks to the criminal organization. Miguel and Carmen had been forced to provide detailed information about their observation, their communications with other people, and any documentation they might have created regarding suspicious activities. The interrogation had continued for approximately 4 hours before both parents were killed. According to Torino's confession, the bodies had been dismembered to facilitate disposal and transported to a cremation facility operated by criminal associates who processed the remains without creating official records. The disposal operation had been coordinated to ensure that no physical evidence would ever be recovered that could connect the deaths to his organization. The confession included detailed information about the cover-up that had followed the murders, including Torino's coordination with Detective Lieutenant Morrison to misdirect the investigation and generate false leads designed to waste law. The false information had been carefully crafted based on Morrison's inside knowledge. Morrison was invaluable for understanding how the investigation would develop and what types of false leads would be most effective for consuming law enforcement resources, Torino would. His access to case information allowed us to stay ahead of the investigation while appearing to be uninvolved in the family's disappearance. The confession also revealed the extent of corruption within various law enforcement and government agents that had protected Torino's criminal operations for years. In addition to Morrison, the organization had been paying prosecutors, judges, and federal agents who provided information and protection in exchange for regular financial compensation. Torino identified specific individuals who had received payments for services ranging from information sharing and evidence suppression to favorable treatment in court proceedings. The corruption had extended to building inspectors, licensing officials, and other government personnel who facilitated various aspects of the criminal organization's operation. Most shocking was Torino's revelation that his organization had been responsible for at least 8 other disappearances and suspicious deaths throughout Central Florida, including several cases that had never been connected to criminal activity. The victims had included potential witnesses, criminal associates who posed security risks, and law enforcement officers who had become too aggressive in their investigation. The confession sessions continued for 5 days as prosecutors worked to verify details and obtain complete information about all aspects of Torino's criminal net. His cooperation provided the foundation for understanding nearly a decade of criminal activity and systematic corruption that had enabled his organization to operate throughout the. Torino's detailed confession resolved the nearly 2-year mystery of what had happened to the Castillo family while revealing the sophisticated criminal enterprise that had been exploiting Orlando's tourism economy for years. His willingness to provide complete information in exchange for avoiding the death penalty gave prosecutors the evidence necessary to pursue additional prosecutions and recover the family's remains. However, Torino's matter-of-fact description of planning and executing the murders, combined with his years of successful criminal operations, demonstrated the cold, calculating nature of organized crime figures who view violence as simply another business tool. His confession provided closure for the investigation, but also revealed the true scope of criminal activity that had been hidden within Orlando's legitimate business community. Vincent Torino's confession provided investigators with specific information about the location where the Castillo family's remains had been disposed of, finally allowing law enforcement to recover physical evidence that could provide closure for the victim's relative. The information led to a cremation facility in rural Orange County that had been used by Torino's organization to eliminate evidence of their violent crime. The facility, operated by Antonio Mendez under the legitimate business name Eternal Rest Cremation Services, had been processing bodies for Torino's criminal network for over 3 years. Mendez had received substantial payments for disposing of remains without creating official records or asking questions about the circumstances of death. Agent Rodriguez coordinated with federal forensic specialists to conduct a comprehensive investigation of the cremation facility and surrounding property. The investigation required sophisticated techniques to identify trace evidence and determine exactly how the Castillo family's remains had been processed and disposed of. Forensic analysis of the cremation equipment revealed DNA evidence confirming that the Castillo family had been processed at the facility in late June 2005. The evidence included traces of genetic material from Miguel, Carmen, and Sofia that had survived the cremation process and remained embedded in equipment surface. Most significantly, investigators discovered that Mendez had preserved small samples of cremated remains in sealed containers, apparently as insurance against potential criminal associates who might attempt to eliminate him as a witness. The samples included ashes that DNA analysis confirmed belonged to the Castillo family members. The recovery of the family's remains provided the physical evidence necessary to support murder charges and gave the Castillo family's relatives the closure they had been seeking for nearly 2 years. However, the revelation of how their loved ones had been disposed of created additional trauma for family members who were already struggling with the loss. Detective Santos worked with victim advocates and family counselors to help the Castillo relatives process the difficult information about their loved one's fate. The family's Catholic faith provided some comfort, but learning the specific details of the murders and disposal created lasting emotional impacts that would require ongoing support. Finding out what happened to Miguel, Carmen, and Sofia was what we needed to begin healing, told Santos. But knowing how they suffered and how their bodies were treated makes the grief even more difficult to bear. At least now we know the truth and can. The investigation of the cremation facility also revealed evidence of other victims who had been processed through Mendez's operation over the years. forensic analysis identified DNA traces from at least 6 other individuals whose disappearances had never been solved by law enforcement agencies throughout Central Florida. Agent Rodriguez coordinated with other law enforcement agencies to investigate the additional victims and determine whether their cases were connected to Torino's criminal network or other organized crime activity. The discoveries led to reopening several cold cases and potentially providing closure for other families who had lost loved ones. The forensic investigation also uncovered financial records that detailed payments Mendez had received for disposal services, providing additional evidence of Torino's criminal operations and the systematic nature of his organization's violent activities. The records showed regular payments that corresponded to periods when potential threats to the organization had been eliminated. Mendez's cooperation with investigators revealed that Torino's organization had been using multiple disposal methods for victims, including burial in remote locations, disposal through construction projects, and process through various funeral industries. The sophistication of the body disposal operations demonstrated the organization's experience in eliminating evidence of violent crime. The investigation expanded to include examination of construction projects that had been completed by companies connected to Torino's network, looking for evidence that murder victims might have been disposed of through concrete pours and other construction activity. The searches required sophisticated ground-penetrating radar and other technical equipment to detect potential burial sites. Most disturbing was the discovery that Torino's organization had been systematically eliminating potential witnesses for years while using their law enforcement connection to ensure that disappearances weren't properly investigated. The criminal network's ability to commit murders with impunity had been enabled by corruption that reached into the highest levels of local government. The recovery operations also revealed evidence of Torino's money laundering activities, including financial records that showed how proceeds from various criminal enterprises had been processed through legitimate businesses in the tourism industry. The money laundering operations had generated tens of millions of dollars in illegal profits over nearly a decade. Detective Santos coordinated with financial analysts to trace assets that could be recovered for victims' families and law enforcement agencies that had been affected by Torino's criminal activity. The asset recovery process revealed the true scope of the criminal organization's financial operation and their infiltration of legitimate business. The evidence recovered from the cremation facility and related investigations provided prosecutors with additional charges that could be filed against Torino and his associate, including charges related to the other murder victims whose remains had been processed through Mendez's. Agent Rodriguez worked with federal prosecutors to organize the massive amount of evidence that had been gathered through nearly 2 years of investigation, ensuring that all materials would be properly presented during trial. The evidence compilation required teams of analysts working to correlate physical evidence, financial records, and witness testimony. The recovery of the Castillo family's remains marked a crucial milestone in the investigation, providing the physical evidence necessary to support murder convictions while giving the victim's family the closure they needed to begin healing. However, the discoveries had also revealed the true scope of Torino's criminal activities and the systematic nature of corruption that had protected his organization. The investigation had evolved from a single missing person into a comprehensive examination of organized crime and corruption that had affected hundreds of victims. The evidence gathered would support prosecutions that would take years to meet, while revealing vulnerabilities in law enforcement and government systems required significant reforms. The trial of Vincent Torino and his criminal associates began on January 15, 2008 in federal court in Orlando, with Torino facing multiple counts of first-degree murder, racketeering, and conspiracy charges that could result in the death penalty. The prosecution's case, led by Michael Davids, represented one of the most comprehensive organized crime in Florida. The trial attracted national media attention due to the shocking nature of the crimes and the extensive corruption that had been exposed during the investigation. Court proceedings were conducted under enhanced security measures, given the violent history of Torino's organization and the potential intimidation of witnesses and jurors. Prosecutor Davidson's opening statement outlined the systematic nature of Torino's criminal enterprise and the cold-blooded murder of the Castillo family to protect illegal operations worth millions of dollars. The prosecution promised to present video evidence, documentary materials, and witness testimony that would prove Torino's guilt beyond any reasonable doubt. Vincent Torino built a criminal empire by exploiting Orlando's tourism industry and the hardworking immigrants who serve that industry, Davidson told the jury. When Miguel, Carmen, and Sofia Castillo accidentally threatened that empire by witnessing criminal activities, Torino ordered their execution official to conduct his other illegal. Torino's defense team, led by prominent criminal attorney Sarah Martinez, faced the challenge of defending against overwhelming evidence that included video recordings of the murders and Torino's own detailed confession. Martinez's strategy focused on portraying Torino as a businessman who had been coerced into criminal activities by more dangerous. However, the prosecution's evidence clearly demonstrated that Torino had been the leader of the criminal organization and the primary architect of the Castillo murder. Video recordings showed him directing the operation and making key decisions about how the crimes would be conducted and covered up. Agent Rodriguez testified for 4 days about the investigation's progression from the initial disappearance through the undercover operation that had finally exposed Torino's criminal network. Her testimony provided crucial context for understanding how the systematic corruption had nearly allowed the murders to remain unsolved. Torino's organization wasn't just committing crimes, they were systematically corrupting the law enforcement system designed to stop them, Rodriguez told the jury. Their ability to operate for years without being caught wasn't due to criminal cleverness alone, but because they had corrupted the very people who were supposed to be investigating their activities. Detective Santos provided emotional testimony about her 2-year investigation and the challenges created by the corruption within her own department. Her account of working alongside Detective Lieutenant Morrison while unknowingly pursuing criminals he protecting demonstrated the sophisticated nature of the criminal organization's infiltration of law enforcement. Learning that my supervisor had been working for who killed the Castillo family was one of the most devastating experiences of my career, Santos. Every lead we pursued, every strategy we developed was being reported to the criminals we were trying to catch. It's a miracle we were able to solve the case at all. The prosecution's presentation of video evidence was carefully managed to convey essential facts while minimizing traumatic impact on jurors and court personnel. Edited segments showed key moments from planning discussions and enough of the actual crimes to establish Torino's direct involvement without subjecting viewers to unnecessarily graphic content. The video evidence was devastating for Torino's defense, clearly showing him directing the murders, statements that contradicted any claim that he was acting under coercion. His calm, businesslike demeanor discussing the elimination of an entire family demonstrated the calculated nature of his crime. Expert witnesses testified about the sophisticated money laundering operations that had motivated the Castillo murders, explaining how the family's observations of irregular activities could have exposed criminal enterprises worth tens of millions of dollars. The financial testimony provided context for understanding why Torino had viewed them as an existential threat. Antonio Mendez, the cremation facility operator who had disposed of the Castillo family's remains, provided crucial testimony about the systematic nature of Torino's body disposal operation. His cooperation had been essential for recovering physical evidence and understanding how the criminal organization had eliminated witnesses for years. Vincent Torino treated murder like any other business transaction, Mendez testified. He would call and arrange for disposal services with the same tone he used to discuss restaurant deliveries or transportation schedule. The victims were just problems to be solved through his normal business. The prosecution also presented testimony from Agent Chen about her undercover infiltration of Torino's organization and the intelligence she had gathered about their criminal activities. Her testimony provided first-hand evidence of the planning and coordination that had characterized the criminal network's operation. Detective Lieutenant Morrison, who had been convicted separately on corruption charges, testified as part of his cooperation agreement with prosecutors. His account of providing information to Torino's organization revealed the extent of law enforcement infiltration and the systematic nature of the cover-up that had nearly prevented justice. The prosecution's case included testimony from family members of other victims whose remains had been discovered during the investigation, demonstrating the pattern of violence that characterized Torino's criminal enterprise. The additional murders provided evidence of ongoing criminal conspiracy that supported racketeering charges. Carlos Castillo, Miguel's brother, provided victim impact testimony that brought the human cost of Torino's crimes into sharp focus for jurors. His emotional account of the family's 2-year search for answers and the trauma of learning the truth about their loved one's fate provided powerful context for the prosecution's case. Miguel, Carmen, and Sofia came to Orlando to build a better life for their family, Carlos told the jury through tears. They worked hard, followed the law, and never hurt anyone. They died because they accidentally saw criminal activities, and their killer showed no more concern for their lives than he would for disposing of garbage. The trial lasted 6 weeks, with the prosecution presenting 89 witnesses and hundreds of pieces of evidence that documented nearly a decade of criminal activity. The comprehensive case demonstrated not only Torino's guilt in the Castillo murders, but also the broader impact of his criminal organization on Central Florida's community. The jury deliberated for 3 days before returning guilty verdicts on all charges against Vincent Torino, including 3 counts of first-degree murder for the deaths of Miguel, Carmen, and Sofia Castillo. The convictions automatically triggered penalty phase proceedings to determine whether Torino would receive life imprisonment or the death penalty. Vincent Torino was sentenced to death on March 15, 2008, for the murders of Miguel, Carmen, and Sofia Castillo, with additional life sentences for racketeering and conspiracy charges. The penalty phase had lasted 2 weeks, with prosecutors presenting evidence of Torino's leadership in a criminal organization responsible for at least 11 murders over nearly a decade. The death sentences provided a measure of justice. Castillo family, though no punishment could restore the lives that had been lost or undo the trauma experienced by their relatives and friends. Carlos Castillo and other family members expressed gratitude for the investigators' persistence in the ultimate achievement of justice despite the systematic corruption that had nearly prevented it. Miguel, Carmen, and Sofia can finally rest in peace knowing that their killer will never harm another family, Carlos said outside the courthouse. After sentence, Detective Santos and Agent Rodriguez never gave up on finding the truth, even when it seemed impossible. Their dedication gave us the closure we needed to begin healing. The successful prosecution of Torino and his associates marked the end of one of Central Florida's most sophisticated criminal organizations, but it also revealed vulnerabilities in law enforcement government system that required comprehensive reform. The systematic corruption protected criminal activities for years prompted investigations and policy throughout the region. Detective Santos was promoted to lieutenant and assigned to lead a new anti-corruption unit within the Orange County Sheriff's Office, focusing on preventing and detecting criminal infiltration of law enforcement agents. Her experience with the Castillo case provided valuable insights for developing enhanced security measures and investigation. Agent Rodriguez received a commendation from FBI Director Robert Mueller for her leadership of the investigation that had exposed corruption and dismantled a major criminal organization. Her innovative use of undercover operations and financial analysis became models for investigating sophisticated organized crime networks. Agent Chen, who had conducted the crucial undercover infiltration of Torino's organization, was reassigned to the FBI's Organized Crime Division headquarters in Washington, where she developed training programs for other agents conducting long-term undercover operations in criminal enterprises. The corruption investigation resulted in prosecutions of 12 law enforcement officers, 4 prosecutors, and 2 judges, who had received payments from Torino's organization in exchange for protection and information. The comprehensive cleanup restored public confidence in law enforcement integrity while demonstrating the importance of internal oversight ability. Detective Lieutenant Morrison received a sentence of 25 years in federal prison for his role in protecting Torino's criminal activities and obstructing the Castillo investigation. His betrayal of his oath and his colleagues became a case study in police academies throughout the country for understanding and preventing law enforcement corruption. The Castillo case prompted legislative changes in Florida's witness protection procedures, and protocols for coordinating between federal and local law enforcement agencies. The systematic failures that had nearly allowed the murders to remain unsolved highlighted the need for better security measures and information-sharing controls. The cremation facility used to dispose of the Castillo family's remains was permanently closed, and Antonio Mendez received a sentence of 15 years in federal prison for his role in destroying evidence and facilitating multiple murders. Enhanced oversight procedures were implemented for funeral industry operations throughout Florida. Orlando's tourism industry implemented new security measures and background check procedures designed to prevent criminal organizations from exploiting legitimate businesses for illegal activity. The reforms included enhanced coordination with law enforcement agencies, and improved reporting procedures for suspicious activities. The Castillo family established a memorial fund to support other families dealing with missing persons cases and to provide resources for law enforcement agencies investigating organized crime activities. The fund honored Miguel, Carmen, and Sofia's memory while helping others who faced similar tragedy. A memorial garden was dedicated at the Lakeside Vista apartment complex Castillo family had lived, serving as a reminder of the importance of community vigilance and support for law enforcement to combat criminal organizations. The garden provided a peaceful space for reflection and remembrance. The case files from the Castillo investigation were preserved as training materials for law enforcement agencies throughout the United States, providing valuable lessons about investigating sophisticated criminal organizations and detecting corruption within law enforcement agencies. The case became required study material for FBI agents and local investigators specializing in organized crime. Several books and documentaries were produced about the Castillo case, focusing on the investigative techniques that had ultimately exposed the criminal network and the importance of persistence in pursuing justice despite systematic obstruction. The case became a frequently cited example of successful organized crime. Vincent Torino was executed by lethal injection on August 23, 2015, 7 years after his conviction. His final statement expressed no remorse for his crimes, instead claiming that his actions had been necessary business decisions required to protect legitimate commercial interests. His execution marked the final chapter in one of Florida's most complex criminal. The Castillo case had lasting impact on law enforcement, government oversight, and community awareness of organized crime activities. The investigation demonstrated that patient, methodical police work combined with federal resources could overcome even sophisticated criminal organizations that had corrupted law enforcement. Detective Santos retired from law enforcement in 2018 after a distinguished career that went largely by her work on the Castillo case. She established a consulting firm specializing in anti-corruption training for law enforcement agents and continued advocating for families of missing persons throughout her retirement. Agent Rodriguez continued her work with the FBI's Organized Crime Division until her retirement in 2020. Overseeing investigations that dismantled criminal organizations throughout the United States using techniques developed during the Castillo investigation. Her career achievements were recognized with numerous awards from federal law enforcement agents. The 20th anniversary of the Castillo family's disappearance in 2025 was marked by a memorial service at the Our Lady of Guadalupe Catholic Church in Orlando, attended by family members, investigators, and community members who had been affected. The service provided an opportunity for reflection on the case's impact and the importance of never giving up the pursuit of justice. For the Orlando community, the Castillo case served as a reminder that criminal organizations can infiltrate even the most trusted institution, but also demonstrated that dedicated investigators can ultimately expose the truth and achieve justice. The case became a defining moment in Central Florida's law enforcement history and a testament to the importance of integrity and persistence in the pursuit of justice for all victims of violent crime.